Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's webinar hosted by NMDA's Healthy Soil Program and in partnership with our partners over at USDA's Natural Resources Conservation Service. My name is Katie Getz, and along with Dean Bruce, we are the co-leads for NMDA's Healthy Soil Program. We intend to spend the next 90 minutes or so with everyone this evening to really explain the primary ticket of admission to NMDA's Healthy Soil Program grants, and that is conservation planning with USDA's NRCS. So we'll explain that to you this evening, that as an individual applicant, this is a pre-application requirement before you reach out to us in pursuit of a grant from the Healthy Soil Program. So let's go ahead and get started with the next slide, please. Let me just walk through the purposes that bring us all together this evening. So we'll get started with a nice presentation from Dan Bladel with NRCS, and he'll be going over their conservation planning process. And then Dean Bruce, who I mentioned to you earlier, he'll be describing how that process from NRCS plugs into NMDA's Healthy Soil Program grants. And importantly, Dean will walk you through the steps that come after conservation planning with NRCS. So really where we hope to end up with everyone is to help you feel motivated to contact NRCS soon. And that way you can make an appointment to complete this conservation planning process well in advance of when you're going to apply for a grant from NMDA's Healthy Soil Program. Next slide, please. So what we have here is a nice video of an example of a project that's been funded through the Healthy Soil Program. And what I'll do when we wrap up is offer some links in the chat so that you all can check out these videos on your own time. But in watching those videos, you'll get a sense of what people were able to do with their own Healthy Soil Program grants after, of course, they completed conservation planning with NRCS. Next slide, please. All right, and we've got two good speakers on tap for you tonight. The first, as I mentioned earlier, is Dan Bladel with NRCS New Mexico. For the next few days, he is the acting state resource conservationist for the state. So you're tapping into a really great resource in hearing from Dan tonight, the explanation about conservation planning with NRCS. Then we'll pass the mic over to my co-lead with the Healthy Soil Program, that's Dean Bruce. He comes from a rich natural resources background, and as I said earlier, he'll be explaining the process of what do you do in applying for a grant from NMDA after you've taken care of conservation planning with NRCS. So before we get rolling, just a few basic housekeeping reminders. Drop those good questions in the chat. If you have a question that will translate best in real time, we ask you to hold that question until the end of the presentation. And then you're welcome to raise your hand and we'll invite you to unmute and voice your question in that way. So we again welcome you to tonight's webinar. And with that, we'll turn it over to Dan Bladel at our partner, NRCS. Dan?
Okay, welcome everybody. Good to have you here. We'll just jump right in and talk about NRCS a little bit and what we do, or conservation planning. So this is who we are. What I'm showing here is the main website. If you were to type NRCS into a search engine, you'd get this, and this is the main national website. And next slide. This is our New Mexico web page, or website, I guess. You can find a lot of different things here, and these websites, there's one for every state, and there's different pictures, but they all have a lot of the same information. It tells about us and all of our different programs. Next slide. This is just to give a little origin of who we are and how we got started. It was in the 30s because mainly the Dust Bowl, wind erosion, which actually New Mexico was a big part of that. And it just brought to the forefront the importance of conservation and resource degradation. You could see the soil blowing away. It blew all the way to Washington, D.C. They said that's actually why they finally passed the legislation. It was, everything's debated. You start a new program, they say, okay. But it was enough on everybody's mind and enough to convince the lawmakers that, hey, we need to start something. So they started actually the Soil Erosion Service, but then it changed the next year to the Soil Conservation Service. And Hugh Hammond Bennett, he was a soil scientist that pushed the reasoning for the agency. Next slide. So this is who we were from all the way to 1994. So these are some older logos, but when I started, it was the Soil Conservation Service. So then in 1994, we changed the name. Some people in Congress and some people in our agency said we need to reflect the broader scope of our agency, which is about more than soil. We often say soil and water conservation districts. Water is always part of it. Actually, our logo there is the raindrop on the soil. Next slide. So the main thing really that we do is to work with people and do conservation planning. And you can see here, this is a resource problem solving and management process that depends on voluntary participation. That is very important. This is not something that's mandated. It has to be based on the premise that the clients make the decisions and implement this decisions. And they will if they understand what's going on with their resources, what the problems are, the concerns, the opportunity, and what effects their decisions will have. Next slide. This is how our process works, how we train our employees and how we think of conservation planning, a 9-step process. And it's not necessarily linear, but it's very logical. Starting out with the steps: identify problems, determine objectives, inventory, analyze the data, make alternatives, evaluate alternatives, make decisions, and implement. And then evaluate the plan, start all over again. Again, we show it as linear. It's easy to show, okay, these are the steps, and it's always going in one direction, and it always works this way. Well, that's not how life is. Life is dynamic and interactive. Next slide, please. So I'll just go through the steps here and elaborate a little bit more. Now, again, keep in mind, you can come back to different steps, and one of the steps you start getting into, okay, we have this resource problem, then you start analyzing your resources, inventorying, and you might say, oh, I have another problem. So it kind of starts the process over again. So just think of it as a way to organize your thoughts on resource concerns and planning for those resource concerns. So the first step really, and this is a very good place to start. So we start with a problem, and we often call them opportunities, and they could be a shared concern of many land managers or a perceived threat. Usually they're first identified based on readily available information. Often you can walk out and identify a problem just by visual. Okay, we've got a problem here. Sometimes opportunities are identified through your local soil and water conservation districts, or often there are watershed scale plans or different land use plans by different land use agencies. Sometimes they have problems that are identified. Next slide, please. So what we use, and this is available also to everyone, and I put the link there, you can have when we send out the data, but this is our list of resource concerns, and that's a term we incorporate into all of our planning and how we describe resource problems. We just call them resource concerns. And it's based on what we're observing in soil, water, air, plants, animals, and energy. So you can separate those out, those resource concerns under soil. See, I may have several resource concerns under soil. I may have them underwater. Actually, they're all very interrelated when you think about it. We often, because we like to analyze and break down things in the way we can understand them, we sort of classify them separately. We say, no, that's only a soil resource concern. But when we're talking about soil health, we're talking about a comprehensive ecological system. So a lot of these things you're going to have concerns in all of these, and they're going to, a lot of this is going to be addressed by working through the planning process and addressing something like soil health. Next slide, please. So just as an example, does anybody see any resource concerns here? I would imagine that somebody out there would see, hey, we've got a problem here. We've got some concerns. So next slide, please. So when you look at it, and we're looking under the soil resource concern, which again, we're classifying it. We're saying we definitely have wind erosion. We can see it. Likely there's compaction problems. Doesn't look like there's a lot of cover and a lot of organic matter. So we probably are depleting the organic matter. We're looking at soil organism habitat loss or degradation and aggregate instability. Now, the four on the bottom are actually the resource concerns that we deal with mostly when we're talking about soil health. So keep those in mind: compaction, organic matter depletion, soil organism habitat loss or degradation, and aggregate instability. Go ahead, next slide. So the second step is to, okay, so we know we've identified problems, and now we're going to determine our objectives. And so the land user or the land manager will identify their objectives. And then we, the conservationists, this is us generally, this can be consultants also. We have a number of people that work with us that may not be directly NRCS, but they work as maybe contractors or as partners. So the conservationist guides the process so that it includes both the needs of the land user and the values of the resource itself. And of course, we're thinking about the on-site and off-site ecological protections. And I would also say the ecological implications. What we do, as you know, as people who work the land, everything we do on the land is going to affect other land. And depends on where you are, but everything you do, like even if you have a small garden or small acreage and stuff, what you're doing on the ground can affect other land because it can affect the water, it could affect the groundwater, it could affect maybe our next neighbor, how you're managing the land. So that's what we mean by off-site ecological protection. And then the objectives, what we decide to do together, it's a partnership, but generally we're leaning on the land user to determine those objectives. And they can be modified, of course, when new information is gathered later in the process. Like I mentioned before, again, you're in step 2, and then all of a sudden you say, well, wait a minute, this is a concern I started with, but I think we should also consider this. And so we're back to that. And then you go back to step 2 and say, okay, now instead of one resource concern, I have multiple resource concerns. Next slide. Okay, so then we've identified the problem and we've said what we're going to do. So now we've got to start collecting data on the land and economic and social information. We also collect that information in addition to our natural resource information, because that's how we make decisions. It's not simply, okay, we've got a problem, we know exactly what to do. It could be multiple thousands of dollars that we just don't have. So that's an economic consideration. We have to take that into account. So then we use this information to further define problems and opportunities. Get as much information so that the plan fits the needs of the land manager and the natural resources. Okay, next step. So this is where we have tools that we use to analyze the data that we find. So we've got ways to do that. Now, the easiest analyzing tool first is the visual. Okay, what's going on? Something like overgrazing is easily evaluated and say, okay, we got a problem here. We've got overgrazing. Well, just as that as an example, it may or may not be overgrazed, depending upon how we further analyze the data. So this step is crucial to developing plans that work for land managers. And it provides us understanding of the baseline conditions that help us to be effective. So these are some examples of tools that we use. In the soil health realm, we use the cropland infield soil health assessment. And for pasture, we have actually a score sheet that we can go through and score the pasture and see what condition it's in. And then, of course, on rangeland, we have the rangeland health assessment. And that is quite in depth. It's got about 19 or 20 indicators that you look at on rangeland that tells you if it's healthy or not. So again, going back to that example, you look out at the range and say, well, it's overgrazed. Well, let's go through this assessment and let's find out how healthy it is. And you may be right. I mean, a lot of this is experience too with the conservationists as they have gone through, worked with a lot of people and a lot of different land uses. So they may be able to spot problems and analyze data a lot of times just very quickly. But anyway, that's some of the tools. We have a lot more tools. And then some data that we use. We look at the data from the Web Soil Survey, maybe from a national wetland survey, if we've got that, and endangered species list. And all tools and data are all available. If anybody ever has questions, you can go to our field offices and inquire about these tools. And they're all generally made public, different ways to get them. Okay, next slide. So then the next step, once we've gone ahead and said, okay, we got a problem and this is our objective. We've done all our resource inventory and we've got all the data. We've analyzed the soil, water, air, plants, animals. We've done all that. And now we're going to start formulating alternatives. And it's an alternative to achieve the goal by solving those problems that we have identified. And so we take advantage of opportunities and meet the needs of the planning project. Alternatives are selected. Our agency and the conservationists that we work with, our job is to present the alternatives. Then the land user, the land manager, is the one who selects the alternative. So you can see in the example, we've got several things that you can do to improve cropland production through soil health. We've got all these different things that we can do, and maybe you'll select all of them. Again, they're not totally separate. You don't just say, well, I'm just going to do one. It'll affect, especially when we're talking about soil health, it's going to affect all of those things. And so you'll find that, yeah, those things are going to be very related and interrelated. Next step. Okay, so now that we've come up with some alternatives, let's evaluate them. Let's see, okay, what's going to work and what we can prioritize them. So we want to evaluate them to determine if they're effective or not. Are they effectively addressing the customer's problems, his opportunities and objectives? We have to consider the actions that we're going to take. Are they going to have positive or detrimental side effects? And detrimental, I'm speaking of for the overall environment. How are they going to have a detrimental effect? And an example of that would be probably an easy one would be a lot of people put in pipelines on rangeland. Actually, they're putting on pipelines so they can get livestock water to solve the problem of livestock water and grazing distribution. But what's going to happen when we tear up the ground to put in the pipeline? Well, we're going to have a slight detrimental effect because now we're opening up the ground. We had to dig it. There's no way to put it in. Sometimes you can put it on top, but generally we're going to bury it. So we're digging a hole and digging a trench and tearing up the land. Well, so now we have a place where weeds can come in. So maybe that's detrimental. And it's going to take a while for the rangeland to recover right there. We can do mitigation measures. A lot of times when I think when power lines are put in and stuff, and roads is another example. They make people seed. Becomes an area where we have to seed and put something down, and a lot of times required to put down native mixes. Usually the pipeline, it's going to be detrimental, but it's not really a long term. It's just going to be a small detrimental effect. But we do have to consider all of those. The conservation has to consider everything they do, and especially when it comes to cultural resources and with environmental concerns. The biggest one that we run into mostly are wetlands and endangered species. So we have to consider, are these going to affect negatively, even though something we're doing is positive. We're saying, okay, this is a positive alternative, but it could affect temporarily something negatively. In the case of endangered species, we have to be really careful because if we say, okay, our project, for example, maybe stream bank protection for erosion, but then we did so much work. We took out willow flycatcher habitat, which is endangered species. How do we deal with that? Well, we have to actually do mitigation where we maybe would plant more willows in another area, or the mitigation might be just, okay, we're going to leave this area alone and only work in this area. So we have to consider that. And then we always provide no fewer than 2 alternatives. And actually, we probably present more than 2, because one alternative is no action. So you can say, okay, I have no action, and then I'm going to do this. But a lot of times, no action is just kind of a given, and then we'll have one alternative, then we'll have another. And oftentimes, one alternative will treat the resource need and treat that in one way. It may not treat the overall ecological conditions. So we actually have other alternatives that have more conservation treatments, and they treat the resource concern in a more comprehensive manner. Next slide, please. So now we're at the point where we've got all the data. We've gone through the inventory, they analyzed the data. We've made some alternative suggestions. We've looked at everything we can do, and we've analyzed it, and we go, okay, man, we're down, and here we are. And so we want the landowner to choose the project or the plan that works best for their situation. So we put it back on them and say, okay, how about? And it's not always just like that. I mean, we're always in discussions, and a lot of times a person may come in and say, okay, I've got this problem, I'm going to solve this. So they actually sign up for a conservation practice. So in their mind, they've really actually gone through all these steps. And so what we usually do is go out and say, okay, well, let's look at your land first. We make a field visit. We say, okay, what's really going on? And it could be as fast as, okay, he already came in with an alternative in his mind, or she did, and you're suspecting, and it depends on your level of experience too, how much you've dealt with land users and conservation over the years. And you may think, okay, that's probably going to work, but we still want to walk through the steps. And if we're doing conservation planning in NRCS, we actually do have to walk through and make sure that we did all the steps, that we covered them all. And so we're ending up with the process. And like I say, it could be sometimes, if it's a big ranch or something, it may take many days or weeks. If it's maybe just a small field or maybe an urban, it may just be a couple hours. And then we can get to this step where they say, let's go ahead and do this. This will be our decision. Okay, next slide. And then, of course, implement the plan. Carry out the conservation treatments that make up the conservation system. We have over about 50 conservation practices. In New Mexico, our land uses, we probably work on about 15 engineering practices that are mostly used. And then we kind of break them out on engineering practices and what we call ecological science practices. And or sometimes we refer to those as vegetative practices. And we probably have about 15 on each side. So 30 practices in New Mexico probably just about covers everything we do. Now we have on our technical guide, our field office technical guide, we have many practices, but a lot of those are nationwide. And that's how the technical guide started. Every office in the U.S. has a technical guide, and every state is a little bit different. So we have actually quite a few different conservation practices. So we implement the plan, but that's not really the end of the process. Next slide, please. Evaluate. We got to see, okay, again, this is a dynamic process. It's ongoing. It's going to continue long after the implementation of a conservation practice. We're in a pecan orchard. We're looking at cover crops here. There may be a conservation practice like a windbreak that continue long after, the implementation. Cropland and soil health systems, we want to think of those as not something that we can just do, and okay, instantly we have soil health. It's really, soil health is more of a way of thinking in a more comprehensive manner to solve all the problems, all the ecological concerns, and to be regenerative. Next slide, please. This is our NRCS map of all of our field offices across the state. We have a field office in every county, I believe. We're spread out. We're online. This is how you get to our listing of our offices. And then I wanted to mention that the reason why it says Arizona up there is because many years ago, when we were organizing soil and water conservation districts and looking at the geographic nature and the political subdivision, Navajo Nation had agencies, and it was divided into 5 agencies, and those were primarily, and that's excluding Eastern Agency, excuse me. This portion here is on the large, or what we call Big Navajo Reservation, and that's where the 5 agencies are pretty much organized, and they're mostly in Arizona. So what New Mexico and Arizona NRCS did was they said, well, we're going to go ahead and let that be organized under Navajo Nation. And most of Navajo Nation is in Arizona, excluding Eastern Agency, because we do have an office in Crown Point. But a lot of that's checkerboard land. But this is contiguous trust land under Navajo, so it fell into Arizona. So we're just saying that even though Arizona NRCS administers everything else in Arizona in that area, and that's basically the Shiprock Agency and the Fort Defiance Agency. Those 2 agencies are up there. If anybody's from Navajo, we'll go ahead and take the application and work with those people that are in New Mexico, okay? Even though they're on Navajo Nation, and Arizona's agreed, okay, this is a New Mexico program. People in New Mexico, even though they're on Navajo Nation, they can apply for these grants also. So that's the reason why we're showing this. And I think that's about it. I think I have one more slide. Yeah, we always put this in, we're our non-discrimination, and this will be on I guess we'll probably send out this presentation. And if anybody has any questions, I guess, Katie, you're capturing these in the chat, and then we'll hand it over to Bruce for now.
Okay, thank you, Dan. Want to offer our appreciation for you going through that the presentation on how individual applicants can begin the process of conservation planning with NRCS. So where I'm going to take over my presentation is once you have met with NRCS, once you have had the conservation planner identify your resource concerns, analyze some of the data, make some recommendations and some alternatives for your soil health improving practices. That's where I'm going to start in on my presentation. So once you have your conservation plan or your conservation planning template in hand, what you learn during the conservation planning process with NRCS will help determine how you design your Healthy Soil Program project. This can include the soil health related resource concerns that were identified and that your project is going to focus on. This can include soil health principles and the agricultural or conservation practices that your project is going to revolve around, and will also specifically address those resource concerns that were identified. It'll also help you understand the timeline that you'll follow in order to implement those practices. And once you've determined the practices, it will help you determine the specific goods and services that you're going to request through grant funding. So just a startup slide on the timeline for conservation planning. We are now October 18th, and we encourage you to start conservation planning, meet with NRCS, set up a site visit as soon as possible. We're going to be opening up the next application cycle for NMDA's Healthy Soil Program roughly February 23rd of next year, and it will close April 26th. However, there is a critical deadline for conservation planning, and the deadline to complete conservation planning with NRCS will be March 22nd, 2024. So you basically have between now, October 18th, and March 22nd, 2024 to have completed conservation planning with NRCS. And we do this because NRCS is a partner, and they have graciously offered to work with us to complete these conservation plans, but we do want to be respectful and allow them ample time to not only work on the Healthy Soil Program, but also their regular job duties as well. And so we encourage you first and foremost to get with NRCS as soon as possible if you are thinking about applying for next year's Healthy Soil Program. So after you've completed conservation planning, and again, we're going to throw that date at you, March 22nd, 2024 at 5 p.m. We want you to continue to write that date down because we want to get these conservation plans completed as soon as possible, because the sooner you complete conservation planning, the more time you have to work out the alternatives, to work on your grant application, research goods and services and things like that. So again, we just want you to write that date down on your calendar. But as you work with NRCS, some individual farmers, ranchers, land managers are already involved with NRCS, and those individuals are welcome to use their current or updated NRCS conservation plan, or you can also use the NMDA conservation planning template, which we have provided to you as individuals, and NRCS has access to them. And it's an expedited version of the full conservation plan. It does, however, NRCS will still go through the full planning process with you, but the plan itself is a very streamlined plan that allows completion in a little bit quicker time frame. But either option will work for the Healthy Soil Program. You can either have your NRCS conservation plan updated, or you can work with your conservation planner to fill out the NMDA conservation planning template. So what do you do with your planning documents? You've got this plan that identifies resource concerns, provides alternatives. What do you do with it? First and foremost, we recommend that you read and reread your conservation planning documents. If there's anything on those documents that may not be readily understood, if NRCS they're accustomed to using a certain vocabulary when it comes to resource concerns. So do ask questions of your NRCS conservation planner if you do not understand some of the things that are written on the plan. Remember, the NRCS conservation planner is there to help you through this process of conservation planning. We encourage you to pay attention to the soil health related resource concerns that NRCS observes on the land that you manage. So this will help guide your project. Again, we mentioned those soil health resource concerns. That's gonna be the premise of your project. What are we trying to fix, or what are we trying to improve on the land that we manage? We also ask you to pay attention to the soil health principles and the agriculture practices that NRCS recommends that you apply. So NRCS, through the conservation planning template, will identify agriculture or conservation practices. Those practices, along with the soil health related resource concerns, all tie back to the soil health principle. We have on our website, the NMDA Healthy Soil Program resource concern guide sheets, which we'll show you in just a minute. These guide sheets help take the resource concerns, the soil health principles, and the agricultural or conservation practices, and they tie them all together and help you understand how it all fits together. Like Dan mentioned earlier, very little in nature is a linear process, and it's the same way with the resource concerns, soil health principles, and the agricultural or conservation practices. They all kind of intermingle, and so we provided that resource concern guide sheet to help you kind of sort all that process out. In addition to looking at your conservation plan to go over the resource concerns, the soil health principles, the practices. We ask you to pay special attention to any recommended species, such as seeding rates, application rates, compost, manure, other amendments, any other recommendations from NRCS. This is going to help guide your budget as you move forward in developing a grant application. So when NRCS recommends a cover crop, say for example, they will also be able to recommend specific species that are going to directly address the resource concerns that exist on your land. So we ask you to continue to work with your NRCS conservation planner because they can make specific recommendations for the soils that you have on your land that you manage and the resource concerns that exist. And so all of this is going to continue to tie together as you develop your grant application. I mentioned the resource concern guide sheets just a minute ago. These guide sheets do have multiple purposes. They help you as the land manager to see the connection between resource concerns, soil health principles, and the agricultural or conservation practices that are potentially applicable to your land. They also help you narrow down your ideas for possible projects. And they allow you, as a land manager, to also research each specific practice using NRCS practice codes that are included, as well as how and when to properly implement those practices. So it gives you a wealth of information that you as the landowner, land manager, have access to begin to research each of those practices NRCS may have recommended and see how to implement those on your land, when to implement those, and some other criteria that will help this be a successful project. These two resource concern guide sheets, we have one for cropland, one for rangeland. They're available on NMDA's Healthy Soil Program website. This is not a document that you have to turn in with your grant application. These guides simply exist to help guide you into putting together a quality application that is going to improve the soil health of your operation. Screenshot here of the cropland resource concern guide sheet. You'll notice on the left-hand column there, we have the resource concern. The first one we mentioned on the document was wind erosion or water erosion. We have some potential agriculture practices that you can implement on cropland to mitigate soil erosion and help improve your soil. We have cover crop, we have no-till, reduced till, field borders, mulching. And you'll notice in the blue there, next to cover crops, we have a 3-digit number. That 3-digit number is what's called a practice code. And these are all hyperlinked in the document. So if you download it electronically, these are hyperlinked. And if you click on that cover crop practice code 340, it will take you directly to the NRCS Field Office Tech Guide, which will help you understand exactly how to implement cover crops, what are the different types of cover crops you could use, what are specific cover crops for different resource concerns that may exist, and things of that nature. And then we move to the last column, and the last column is the soil health principle that is addressed with each of those agriculture practices. So you'll see here that soil health principle 1, 2, 3, and 4 are all addressed with cover crops. And again, this will help provide you with information as you complete your grant application on what soil health principles you're addressing, what resource concerns you're addressing, and what agriculture practices you're implementing on your land to address those principles. And so again, we've packed a wealth of knowledge in these resource concern guide sheets. We do encourage you to take a look at these, and beyond the knowledge that's just contained on the document itself, highly encourage each of you to take a look at some of the practice codes that your NRCS planner may recommend, and look at those on the NRCS Field Office Tech Guide, because there's a tremendous amount of knowledge and information available at your fingertips for you to utilize in planning your project. This is just a screenshot of the Rangeland Resource Concern Guide Sheet. Same information here. We have your resource concerns on the left-hand column, and there in the middle we have agriculture practices, and then the soil health principles. And so, again, we encourage you to make use of this this document, and also you can have it on hand when you're going through the conservation planning process, and ask questions of your NRCS conservation planner. Go through some of the potential alternatives. And so again, this is not something that you have to turn in, but it's simply a guide to help you develop a quality, healthy soil program grant application. So once you have gone through the planning process, you've selected some alternatives to address your resource concerns. One important element is to understand how those practices can be implemented, and specifically when those practices can be implemented in the timeline of the grant. So once you're developing, this will help you develop your budget and your timeline. Notice there that you basically have 10 months to implement all of the practices that you plan on implementing. So the practices must occur between August 2024 and May 2025. So this will help you, once you've selected those practices, you need to be able to fit those into this timeline of activities. And NRCS can also help you with that, to understand, when some of these things can be done, when the most effective time to complete some of these practices can be done. Take, for example, if you're wanting to reestablish some native grasses and forbs and shrubs on rangeland, NRCS can help you determine the most effective time to implement that practice for the best success of that practice. And so, again, as you're developing your grant application, please keep this slide in mind, because project activities must occur between August 2024 and May 2025. So once again, after you've chosen your soil health principles, your ag practices that you're going to implement, you've kind of understood the timeline of when these things can be implemented. Now is the critical time to start researching the goods and services you think you'll need in order to implement those activities. And the goods and services, we're talking about cover crop seed, we're talking about forbs and shrubs, maybe some livestock pipeline, maybe a drinker, maybe some temporary fencing. And this is the point where you'll need to research that and then get specific about exactly what you're going to purchase. When you're filling out your timeline and budget, it may be kind of natural to just put cover crop seed, but that's not specific enough. We need to know what species of cover crop seed you're going to purchase, because the type of seed species that you're going to purchase will always tie back to the resource concerns that were identified during conservation planning. And you want to have those specific cover crop seed species that are going to most impact your resource concerns and help improve your overall soil health. So you're going to identify what you need to purchase, and then also how are these items sold, meaning what units are they sold? Are they sold by the pound, by the ton, by the linear foot? Is a drinker, a livestock drinker, sold by the gallon? These are the things you need to research and be specific in how you put that into your timeline and budget. We do encourage all individual applicants and participants to use weight measures rather than volume measures. This allows us to look back and understand if you're putting out 5 tons per acre of compost, that gives us a better idea versus 5 pickup loads of compost per acre. So we know exactly how much you're putting out per acre. And again, we encourage you and we do ask that you use weight measurements on any purchase that you're going to use that is sold by the pound or using a weight measurement. And then we encourage you to find out exactly what those items are going to cost. And this will help you develop a per unit cost. That way you can scale your project up or down if need be, and also just have a good quality budget that will allow our reviewers to look at your budget and know exactly what this project is going to cost per unit. So the grant application is going to become available from NMDA in early 2024. It's at this point that we encourage you to get ahead of the game, so to speak. We ask that you visit with your local NRCS office as soon as possible. Make an appointment. NRCS has other programs that they are also working on concurrently, and so we do ask you to get in there as soon as possible. Let NRCS know that you're going to be applying for the Healthy Soil Program, and you would like to get on their agenda or their calendar rather to set up a date for a field visit and complete conservation planning on your operation. But if you start now, you'll be way ahead of most people in satisfying the application requirements. Once you get conservation planning out of the way, so to speak, you'll be able to focus on the remainder of the application, such as developing your timeline, your budget, researching those goods and services, and exactly what you're applying for, what you expect the outcomes to be, your goals, your objectives as you want to improve soil health on your operation. And so it's critical that you get conservation planning done early because that will guide your entire project. And so we highly encourage that. It's at this point, I'm going to leave this last slide up for just a second. We're going to open it up for questions here in just a minute, but I want to leave this last slide up because this will help you find your USDA service center to meet with NRCS. And so there is a service center finder on the internet at their website that will help you find your closest USDA service center and get in touch with NRCS and meet with a conservation planner. The next website there is, of course, our Healthy Soil Program webpage, and we do encourage anyone that's interested in applying for the Healthy Soil Program in the coming year to sign up for our e-newsletter. Katie is wonderful about putting out good quality information on our weekly e-newsletter, specifically dates that may be important to the Healthy Soil Program, but also other healthy soil related activities across the state, webinars, field days, workshops. Katie does a great job of putting all that together each week to provide you with information on the latest on healthy soil, but also important dates and reminders of times and dates that are coming up for our program. So I'm going to leave it right there for just one more second, and then I'm actually going to stop sharing my screen, and at that point we will open it up for questions.
Yeah, thank you, Dean and Dan, both. I've noticed that Amy Smith has gone the step of dropping some links in the chat for us. So Amy, thank you so much for doing that. I appreciate the information that we've heard this evening. I know it's been a lot, so we'll get a little clearer with some clarifying questions here. So just ticking through the top here, comment from Beverly Maxwell about producers on the New Mexico side of Navajo to work on conservation planning. So Dan, I wanted to make sure you were aware of the gratitude that exists in that corner of the state to work with New Mexico NRCS. Any comments to streamline that process for people where exactly they should reach out to? Is it to the state office or a local office there, Dan?
Go ahead and reach out to a local office, either Gallup or Aztec, or if you're closer to Crown Point or Grants, any of those, they can let us know. We may they may contact us or the area office to meet with you, but yeah, go see one of those guys or just call us. You can call their office if if you're not in the neighborhood, and we'll go from there.
Thank you, Dan. A comment here from Deanna Sauceda. We just got our results back from our well water and soil tests. High saline in our well. Of course, it's impacting plants, soil, ground cover. I think that illustrates a problem that lots of people see, Dan. So how should an individual applicant like Deanna step through that with NRCS during the conservation planning process? Is that critical information to share with you as the conservation planner?
Absolutely. Yeah, especially if you're using it for irrigation. Lots of times, we do have well, in some areas, not in all areas of New Mexico, but it's not uncommon to have high saline in the soil. And then if you're irrigating with high saline water, that just compounds the problem. There's some solutions. Yeah, it does impact the type of plant, the species of plant, and if you have access to other water, then one of the major ways that we treat that is with flushing of the salts, but it's important to have a cleaner water source with less saline to be able to flush it. But sometimes that's not possible. There's a few other things you can do. Wherever you're located, I would get a hold of the field office wherever your land is located, and talk to the local field office, and they'll be able to help you with your questions and even provide you some maybe some ideas for alternatives.
Thank you, Dan. Okay, a question from Ernest. Can you send the template to our emails? And Dean, this question came up while you were speaking about the conservation planning template. So I just wanted to voice what I provided in the chat here, which is that everything that anyone on tonight's call will need to apply for a grant is linked on our website. So we want to send you there so that you get the full context for the program rather than picking off one document at a time. We've done a good job of laying out in a stepwise fashion how a person would make application to the grant program through NMDA's Healthy Soil program. So really encourage you to bookmark that webpage. You'll find not only the templates that Dean referenced there, but also those great resource concern guide sheets are posted there. That's where you'll find the budget template eventually. Our FAQ will get posted there. Right now, what we're really, really focused on is encouraging people to complete conservation planning. So all the documents posted there at this time point back directly to conservation planning. Dean, there might be more that you'd like to say about the website and how people can be utilizing it at this moment.
Well, I just encourage, prior to doing anything other than knowing you want to apply for the Healthy Soil program, visit our webpage, read through all of the documents that we have available right now, which is currently all of the conservation planning templates, the resource concern guide sheets, and kind of a step-by-step manner. I encourage you to definitely bookmark the website so that you can have it for easy reference, because everything you need to put together a quality application will be on the website. And but right now, the first and foremost, we encourage the conservation planning, and so we encourage you to go there, download the conservation planning template, whether it be cropland or rangeland, or maybe you have both, and then also the resource concern guide sheets, and then make that first contact with NRCS. So that would be my recommendation for right now.
Thank you, Dean. A tag on to that is on that Healthy Soil program webpage, the main one. If you'll scroll to the bottom of that webpage, you'll see the place to subscribe to our e-newsletter that we keep referencing. So we tend to send out really critical reminders of what's on the website and when those things are coming due. So strongly encourage people to get signed up there, and then you can passively receive of these email updates. And that's in fact how we will be notifying you that the recording of tonight's webinar is finally available. I'll keep scrolling down, and I did see a hand up earlier. It went down before I could catch it, but if you've got a question that translates best in real time, we invite you to raise your hand and we'll invite you to unmute here. I'll keep ticking through what's in the chat. Dean, a question for you from Justin Dewey. Are weight measurement rules available, like bulk density of compost, for example?
No, we do not have any rules specifically related to the bulk density of compost or any standards set forth. What we're simply trying to encourage individual applicants to do is, when they are planning on applying compost or manure or soil amendments, to place those units in a weight measurement. We have a technical review committee that reviews the Healthy Soil Program applications. This review committee is made up of land grants, acequias, NMSU Cooperative Extension Service. We have the Soil and Water Conservation Commission. We have many members of the ag community and are tied to the ag community, and this weight measurement allows them to understand exactly how much compost or manure or other soil amendments are being put out, either on a per acre basis or a per square foot basis, and that allows them to kind of check that with standard agronomic rates for compost and things of that nature. But we do not currently have any standard measurements based on bulk density for compost. I'm not sure if that exactly answered your question, but we just do encourage, if there's a possibility to use weight measurements in your budget and timeline. Specifically your budget, so that we can have a better idea of exactly how much you're putting out. If that didn't answer it, I'll try to rehash it again.
Thank you, Dean. Ernest, I see you have your hand up, so go ahead and unmute and ask your question, please.
Our area is rangeland. We live on the Navajo Reservation Trust, and we're supposed to work with Arizona's St. Michael's office, but it's easier, and we're right on the border of Eastern Agency, which is serviced by the Aztec NRC office. So would it be possible to work with the Aztec NRC office, because they're probably only like an hour away versus almost 2.5 hours for St. Michael's? So that's my question.
This is Daniel Bladel. Ernest, yes, go to Aztec, and Chambliss Lantana is there. And you can tell him I sent you, or you can just say, I'm interested in the New Mexico Healthy Soils Grant, and I'd like to work with you. Yes, absolutely.
Great question and a clear, honest answer, Daniel. Thank you very much. And stay unmuted, because I've got another NRCS question for you, Dan. And that is from Steve Cadis. He asks, does NRCS charge a fee for conservation planning?
No, we do not. It is service free. Actually, you've already paid for it in your income taxes, in your supporting of the U.S. government, but it is free. There's no charge. Where money gets involved is with programs, and that's usually federal money going to the producer. But in this case, helping for this program, no, we do not charge a fee.
All right, thank you for that.
And I'll let you tag onto that just real quick. Does NRCS require individual applicants to establish farm records in order to complete the conservation planning template? I'll let you kind of give an answer on that. I know what your answer is, but I'll let you tell the group if you require any individual applicant to establish farm records.
For this program, no. I mention that is because a lot of our programs, well, all of our programs, actually, you do have to establish farm records. And that's including small producers in an urban area. That's a kind of a new thing for us. Establishing farm records means establishing those with another agency, which is our sister agency, whose name is the Farm Services Agency. And if you're just applying for this, and this is the first time you've ever worked with in USDA with NRCS, no, we won't. If you're just applying for this, now our conservationists may make suggestions, say, hey, this, we've got these other programs, and turn into a kind of another path that you follow. And okay, so in that case, well, yeah, you'd want to go through the process of establishing farm records, but not for just this particular program. You do not have to. Does that answer the question?
Yes, sir, Dan. I just wanted everybody to understand that if you're simply applying for the Healthy Soil Program, all you have to do is show up make an appointment with NRCS, visit with them, and they can complete conservation planning without any establishment of farm records. And also, like you just mentioned, it's at no cost to the individual producer. So just wanted to make sure that's clear to everyone. So thank you, Dan.
Yes, thank you both. And I'm trying to capture the good conversation in reply to some of the questions in the chat. I'll read out a back and forth here with Rob Hirsch. The question is the template deadline March 22nd like the conservation plan deadline? And I responded, yes, the deadline to complete conservation planning with NRCS, no matter what paper form that takes. It might be NRCS's full-fledged conservation plans, or it might be our conservation planning templates, which streamline that process. No matter which option you choose as an individual applicant, the deadline remains the same. That's March 22nd at 5 o'clock sharp. In other words, do not approach them the day of and expect the plan to be completed for you that very day. So you'll need to get in the queue sooner than that, recognizing that the deadline to complete conservation planning is March 22nd. Another question from Deanna here. We've applied for a Valencia County bridge grant. How does that play into our grant process? Dean, do you want to speak to that as it relates to NMDA's Healthy Soil Program?
Well, first I would have to ask, what is the bridge grant? I'm not exactly sure what the Valencia County bridge grant is. Deanna, if you could unmute and kind of give me a little background on your question, that would sure help me.
Sure. So there are smaller grants that are done here in Valencia County. I'm not sure if other counties do them, but they kind of get us over the hump or prepare us. So for example, we have applied for ours and we're going to get, we're doing pollinators. We had our soil analysis. We've done a number of things. So we have a couple of things. I've also done a one-off, which is a hoop house. So there are different things that are being done. And they did an analysis on our ground cover and didn't recommend another seeding. So I'm just kind of curious, will that be taken into consideration, or will you guys come in and completely start all over again?
No, when you visit with your conservation planner, they will take into account what you're currently doing and what has currently been done. And that's one thing I encourage all potential applicants to kind of have on hand before you meet with your NRCS conservation planner is, just kind of a history of what you've been doing, in the past, X number of years, or, 6 or 8 months, or whatever it may be, just so that they have an idea of how this land has been managed and what is currently being done related to soil health, so that they can plan in addition to what has currently been being done. But in no way are they basically going to come in and say you have to start from scratch. They will take a look at what is existing, what's currently been done, and use that as your new baseline. And once they move from there, they'll identify, maybe other resource concerns that weren't originally identified when you got the bridge grant. But they will take into account what's currently being done. And again, I encourage all applicants, when, prior to your meeting with NRCS, just kind of jot down some notes of what you've been doing and what has been done on the land, how it's been managed, so that you can provide that information to your NRCS conservation planner. So that gives them a bigger picture, kind of the history of the land. And Deanna, I hope that answered your question in kind of a long, drawn out, probably too much talking way, but I hope that answered your question, that we can use the Healthy Soil Program to complement what is currently being done on the land.
All right, Dean, no, that was great. I really appreciate it.
All right, thank you both. A question that Dean, you can pick off, or Dan, either one, but a question from Jessica. Where would you recommend we take our soil to be tested?
Jessica, we are currently in the process of revising our soil testing and assessment guidelines, but we will soon have those released. Unfortunately, as a state agency, we can't recommend a specific soil testing lab. We do encourage you to, if you have access to the internet, just Google the NMSU soil testing labs. And New Mexico State University has a listing of current accredited soil testing labs. And hopefully that'll get you started and kind of guide you in that direction. You can also visit with your local NRCS office. They typically have a list of soil testing labs that are accredited and are capable of utilizing testing processes that are developed for arid lands. And, typically we classify New Mexico as an arid landscape. And so there are some soil labs that do a better job of testing for limited rainfall lands, such as we have in New Mexico. But I would encourage you to either visit with NMSU on their website, NRCS office, or you could visit your local NMSU Cooperative Extension Service office. There's typically one in every county, and they can guide you in that direction. And Dan, you might have something to add to that.
Yeah, no, thank you. Exactly the same. We do generally have those lists at our offices. They can provide you usually with a list of recommended labs, but we don't endorse any. So perfect, Dean. Thanks.
Yes, thank you both. Question from Courtney. Hi, Courtney. She says, I'm working with a nonprofit organization to build a community garden. Within the garden, we want to start a community compost program. Could this grant go towards funding the supplies, basically building compost bins, tools necessary to turn compost? I want to speak to that and then also invite some comments from Dean. So the purpose of our grants is to fund direct improvement of the soil through application of soil health principles and practices. So I would say, Courtney, that it sort of depends on how you set up your project. There's got to be some direct application of the principles and the practices to land being worked here in New Mexico. So if those supplies you mentioned are part of that bigger effort, certainly it would fit within the scope of the program. Dean, do you have additional comments from your more technical side of the program?
No, actually, I think you nailed it. Again, we direct these funds at on the ground improvement of soil health. But if in addition to that, there are goods and services and supplies that are needed to produce soil health on the ground, they would be considered for funding.
Very good. Thank you, Dean. I saw a good question about who can apply for this grant, an NMSU faculty or researcher. So I provided in the chat a link to take you back to the main webpage for NMDA's Healthy Soil Program, because we've got two different applicant types. We didn't illustrate that tonight because tonight's webinar is really focused on our individual applicants. We also fund grants to eligible entities. That's a different applicant type, a different process. And you'll find more information about that on our Healthy Soil Program webpage, Saeed. So really encourage you to check that out and stay tuned for more information on that separate application process. Denise asks, is this a cost share program? Denise, I'll speak to that. In FY25, there is not a requirement for matching or in-kind contributions from the individual applicant. What we have observed in previous grant funding cycles is that everyone has some level of investment in their project, usually via their own labor contributions. So we make the assumption based on what we've observed that everyone is already contributing some level of in-kind contribution through their own hands-on labor. So there is not a requirement for a matching or in-kind contribution there. Deanna offers the context. There may be charges for water and soil testing at your extension office, so be sure to ask those details. Deanna, I'd like to add to that for NMDA's Healthy Soil Program, for our successful grantees, those who are awarded a grant during this competitive process that will roll out in early 2024, we'll actually pay for a pre-project soil test. And what happens after that is the grantee returns to us the data that they've collected from that laboratory and that they've collected from their own fields or pastures. And that becomes part of our baseline soil health assessment that we're trying to build across the state. Dean might want to say more about that.
No, I don't have a whole lot to add other than, what Katie mentioned, that if you are successful in applying for a grant, NMDA will reimburse the cost of soil testing on the land that's involved in the grant. And so nothing else really to say on that one. See a question from Ernest. It appears that he has approximately 350 to 400 acres of badland. How can it be addressed? And Ernest, this is exactly why we recommend working with NRCS, because they can put boots on the ground. They can take a look at the land itself and help you understand the resource concerns that exist, but also how you can address those resource concerns. And so, without having a more context into it, we just recommend you make contact with your local NRCS office. I believe Chambliss Lantana would probably be more than willing to kind of help you out on that particular question. Once they put boots on the ground and kind of see what exactly is going on that land. So that's where we just encourage producers to visit with NRCS as soon as possible and get some of those questions answered.
Very good. Thank you both for that. Earlier, I wasn't able to play some videos that we've captured of some of our previously funded projects. So right now I'm dropping into the chat a playlist of those videos that exist on NMDA's YouTube page. So feel free to check those out at your leisure. And again, you might arrive at a project that looks very different because all these projects are really custom based on what you learn from NRCS's conservation planning process. But maybe that'll give you a little hope as to where you might come out in the process if you're successful in applying for a grant. Just a quick time check. I see we've got just under 10 minutes before we're scheduled to wrap up and return everyone to their evening. So looking for more questions in the chat. Anyone who wants to voice a question is welcome to raise their hand and ask it out loud. I'll keep an eye on the chat, but Dean and Dan, any final comments from you this evening as we start to wrap things up?
Yeah, I just want to offer my appreciation to not only Dan for giving us a portion of his night to present on the NRCS conservation planning process, but I want to thank each of you individual applicants or potential applicants that have signed on tonight. One thing I'll leave you with, we do encourage you to visit the NMDA Healthy Soil Program website, but also we encourage questions. If you have some questions, Katie will put the HSP email in the chat. We encourage your questions, and I'm always more than willing to talk to people about farming and ranching. And if you have questions, that'll get to me, and be glad to kind of assist you in developing an application. But the one thing I just want to encourage everyone tonight is to seek out your NRCS office as soon as possible and start working on conservation planning. That way you have plenty of time to develop a quality application. Dan, I'll kind of turn it over to you, and then we'll let maybe Katie finish up after you speak.
Okay, thank you so much for inviting us to talk about conservation and soil health. Soil health is kind of a new concept, but not really, especially not looking at the way that indigenous farmers, Navajos, Pueblos in our area, had farmed and taken care of the soil. The principles that we're discovering are almost like a rediscovery. And what's exciting about it and why it's new is because in conventional agriculture, and especially the way I was trained, we looked at other solutions for land productivity, and they do offer some, for example, corn and fertilizers. We've made incredible strides in yields and things like that, but we've also come to realize that those solutions, especially a lot of use of chemicals and relying on those, have shown up as actually degrading our environment. And the principles of soil health are a way to think about soil and growing in the soil plant relationship in a kind of a new way, in a regenerative way. And that's what we're in so many ways discovering. And that's what really drove the Healthy Soil Act in New Mexico. We had a lot of people that were just on fire for thinking about soil in that way. And, it's actually helping us. When I showed the slides of how we started, in those days, in the 30s, things were perfect for soil health. And in fact, people were probably doing some things towards soil health. But as we've gone down the road, and especially in farming, we've come to realize that, we need to get back to some of those principles. So thank you so much for inviting us, and encourage everyone to think about your individual projects, get a hold of us, get the conservation planning done, and let's make some great progress.
I don't think we could top either one of those closing comments. So all I will end with is the link to be in touch with NRCS. That's where we wanted to deliver you at the end of this evening's webinar, is motivated to reach out to NRCS, establish contact to get conservation planning completed. That way you can set your sights exclusively on focusing, rather on applying for a grant from NMDA's Healthy Soil Program when that application becomes available in early 2024. I'm dropping that link in the chat. Please save it and be in touch with NRCS. We will catch you soon on the next NMDA Healthy Soil Program event. Be sure to subscribe to our newsletter to learn of such events going forward. Thank you very much, everybody. Have a good evening.